Great to see everyone as we're starting our third week of reading through the Bible. And today we pick up in Genesis chapter 45, picking up where Brother Mike left off, as last week he took us through Genesis 24 through Genesis 44. So in chapter 45, Joseph is about to reveal himself to his brothers. Mike led you this far, so we're not going to repeat any of that. So we pick up in Genesis 45. And in the first part of this chapter, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and he said, "I am Joseph." The brothers could not believe it. There's just this stunned sense of silence. And he said, "God sent me before you for the preserving of life. You might have meant it for harm." Remember, they sold him into slavery. He winds up in Egypt, and now he is over Pharaoh's entire country, and he has stewardship over the grain, so they bought the grain from him. You know that story that Mike led you through last week. In fact, he said, "God made me a father to Pharaoh." And he said, "Go get my father. Go get Jacob. Go get daddy. Don't delay. There's still going to be 5 years of famine left in the land, and you will settle in the land of Goshen." So he tells Pharaoh. Pharaoh orders wagons to be sent to bring Jacob and the family of Joseph to Egypt. And he tells his brothers, do not quarrel on the way. He knew his brothers very well, didn't he? Don't quarrel on the way. And when they got there and told Jacob, he didn't believe him. He's absolutely stunned. And you could understand that. He thought Joseph had been killed many years ago. And finally, when he saw the wagons and the Egyptian goods that were sent, he believed. And he said, "It's enough for me. I will go and see my son Joseph before I die." And then in chapter 46, you get Jacob, Israel, worshiping and sacrificing in the altar at Beersheba. That's probably the altar that Isaac had built many years earlier. And here, God reaffirms to him the Abrahamic covenant. God will bless you. He'll multiply your descendants. And he said, for the sake of Abraham, that means that God is honoring that covenant. Remember that covenant back in Genesis 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 17, that is kind of remembered all through the book of Genesis and really on through the Bible. And so he reaffirms the Abrahamic covenant with Israel, Jacob. I'll make of you a great nation, and Joseph will close your eyes. So loaded the wagons that Pharaoh sent, went to Egypt, the extended family, all he had. And the Bible tells us that 70 came. Now this would probably include several that are already in Egypt, not including Joseph's two sons, and probably also add Jacob to that list. So Jacob's family arrives in Goshen, and Joseph goes up to see his father. Can you imagine that homecoming? He thought that Joseph was dead, and they meet, and the Bible says that they cry on each other's necks. So he instructs them, tell Pharaoh that you're shepherds. Now, the reason for this is that the shepherds were loathsome to the Egyptians, and it would kind of maintain the national identity of the Israelites because the Egyptians really wouldn't want to be with shepherds. Kind of amazing down through the years how God maintains the nation of Israel. It had to begin, obviously, back then. So, in chapter 47, Joseph takes 5 of his brothers to meet Pharaoh, and he says, you're going to live in Goshen. Pharaoh does. He confirms what Joseph has already told him, the best of the land. In fact, if there's any capable men among you, let them take care of my livestock. See how God is just blessing everything that Joseph had done? So Joseph and Jacob meet Pharaoh. Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Go back to Genesis 12, talks about in the Abrahamic covenant, I will bless those that bless you. So all nations that bless Israel will be blessed. And so Jacob, following that, blesses Pharaoh in accord with the Abrahamic covenant. He said, the best of the land is before you. Go live in Goshen in the Nile Delta, a very rich area, also known as Ramses. So the people of Egypt and Canaan are now having to buy food. Now, Joseph's family, obviously, Jacob and all of them are in Goshen, but they buy food. The famine is still going on. They buy food until the food is gone. Then they give their livestock for food. Then they give their land for food. And then they just say, okay, we'll just sell ourselves to food because if we don't have food, we're going to die. And so Joseph kind of brings everything to Pharaoh. The priests of Egypt are exempted from this, of course. And so everyone in the end is paying a 1/5 tax to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh owns everything. But Israel's Jacob and his family is in Goshen, and the Bible says that they were very prosperous and very fruitful. And so Jacob gets to live 17 years in Goshen, and so it's kind of amazing. He had 17 years literally with his son. And he gets old and is about to die, and he said, "Don't bury me in the land of Egypt." And then the Bible paints this beautiful picture of him getting very old and worshiping at the head of his bed. Then chapter 48, Jacob knows the end is near. He sends for Joseph, and it's kind of an incredible scene because Joseph comes with his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And Jacob said, "I'm going to adopt your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Other children you have will be yours, but Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine." And so Joseph is actually going to get a double blessing. You'll never see the tribe of Joseph because it is the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, I say you'll never see. Sometimes there's a reference to the tribe of Joseph, which is usually a reference to the tribe of Manasseh. But in all the lists, you never see the tribe of Joseph mentioned. So something amazing happened as Jacob is blessing them. He crosses his hands and he puts his right hand literally on Ephraim, which is the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh. So he's given the priority of blessing to the younger. And so Joseph sees this, he's upset, and Jacob said, I know what I'm doing. God has called this blessing to be upon the younger. The younger will be stronger. But you will have, again, Joseph, a double inheritance, and God will bless you. Then you come over into chapter 49, and Jacob calls all of his sons together, and he pronounces this prophecy about the future of Israel through his sons. And it's interesting that the blessing, he bypasses Reuben. Remember, Reuben had committed a terrible sin. He'd gone into his father's concubine and lay with her. So Reuben is bypassed. Then Simeon and Levi, the second and third, they're bypassed also because of their murderous revenge at Shechem for the Shechemites after Shechem had raped Dinah. And then he chooses his fourth son. This is amazing. He chooses Judah for the blessing. Now, you can say a lot of bad things about Judah. Judah was kind of responsible for selling Joseph into slavery. The story of Judah and Tamar there and all of that. But nevertheless, God's choice is of Judah. Becomes the strongest tribe. The Davidic covenant, the whole southern kingdom will come through Judah. And he says in verse 10, the scepter will not depart the ruler's staff until Shiloh, which is a reference to he, until he comes. What does it mean? It will not depart from you until he comes. Who is the he? Well, the he is Jesus. Shiloh is literally a reference to the coming of Jesus. So clearly, Judah gets the primary blessing because this is the tribe through which Jesus will come. Then he goes to bless Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh again. Interestingly about Ephraim and Manasseh, there's blessing, but there'll also be conflict. So Jacob lived 147 years old, and he said, don't bury me again in Egypt. He taught that earlier. Now he gives specific instructions. Bury me in the cave of Machpelah. Remember, this is the place where Abraham is buried, and all of the patriarchs literally are buried here, everybody. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Leah. Only Rachel is not buried there. So he dies at 147 years old. And chapter 50 describes the fact that Jacob is embalmed. There are 70 days of mourning. And then clearly they carry out his wishes, and he's buried in the cave of Machpelah. A large entourage of Egyptians, the entire family go. Only the little ones are left behind. And so it's this incredible scene. And so when the funeral is over, the brothers are scared. Joseph would now take revenge because of what they'd done. And they come to him and say, hey, Daddy was afraid that when we were gone, you might take revenge. And Joseph breaks down and cries, and he again reminds them, what you meant for harm, God meant for the saving of many souls, for preserving the nation. And so time goes on. Joseph lives to ripe old age. And as he's about to die, he gives this command. He said, when you go out of Egypt. God has promised the Abrahamic covenant to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. When this happens, when you fulfill this, carry my bones with you. Don't leave me here. And then we come over into the first chapter of Exodus, and now we are coming into the Exodus period, obviously. Might add also, Hebrews 11:22 says this, that by faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the Exodus. We just talked about this. Of the sons of Israel, gave orders concerning his bones. He looked ahead, well, to what would happen. So, Jacob's and Israel, his name, remember, Jacob, Israel, 70 descendants had increased dramatically in the time since Joseph's death. And there's another Pharaoh. And now as perhaps you have some 2 million people. They're this great nation now. And a new king, a new dynasty comes in. A new Pharaoh of the Bible said that knew nothing about Joseph. And he's very concerned about the number and the power of the Israelites. They might join themselves to an invader. So there are taskmasters over them. They're now slaves working and doing all these things, building great building projects. Some surmise perhaps some of the pyramids, perhaps, although the Bible doesn't say that. So it's kind of this thing where it sees the Israelites, the Egyptians do, as an economic asset, but also as a possible threat. So they afflict them and multiplied their lives with bitter work and labor and bricks and mortar. And the king finally just says, we can't have this. There's too many of them. So he calls these two Hebrew midwives, Shipporah and Puah, and he said, okay, when a Hebrew gives birth to a child, if it's a son, kill it. If it's a girl, let it live. Well, they feared God, the Bible says, and the Hebrew midwives did not put them to death. God blessed them. So Pharaoh comes up with his final solution, and his final solution is this. We're going to throw every Hebrew son into the Nile, and that sets us up for our next lesson. God bless you. I hope you enjoyed this. A lot to cover, but if we're going to go through the Bible, we're going to have to move quickly and cover a lot. God bless you. Have a great day. Remember, read the Bible.